Hi, this is Dan Watanabe, and welcome to Backward Engineering Your Script. Today we're going to talk about genre versus personal story. This is probably not as relevant for those of you who've been writing for a long time, but for those of you who are just starting, this might be one of the most difficult decisions you have to make. What should your script be about? There's two real choices. The first of these is to do a genre piece. The advantages of doing a genre piece are that it's usually a style that you already know. For example, if you're going to do a horror script, there are certain conventions that you can fall back on that are kind of by the book, and at least it can give you a starting off point. From that starting off point, you can go and add and embellish and come up with even more outrageous and interesting twists. But you have a basic frame and foundation in case you feel that old bugaboo of writer's block creeping up on you. The other advantage of genre is that it's much more reliant on audience expectation. When you're doing a Western, for example, there are certain archetype characters that you will see all the time in it, whether it be the John Wayne type hero who might, in your instance, be a backward take on that and be an anti-hero like Clint Eastwood in The Unforgiven, or it could just be a traditional, and you usually have the kind of girl gone wrong, either with a heart of gold or a heart of steel, and you have the irascible, eccentric villain. Let's say that you're doing a romantic comedy. Normally you have very, very clear types of the two people who fall in love. One of them tends to be a stuffed shirt, and one of them is probably very free-spirited. Think Barefoot in the Park, where you have a stuffy lawyer versus someone who might as well have been a Chelsea girl or something like that, where you can have that fun with the difference in characteristics. You can always reverse those audience expectations as well. The other option that you have is to do something that's a more personal story. Now, some people find this much easier to do because obviously you're writing about yourself. And when you write about yourself, not only is it a topic that you're intrinsically interested in, but it's something that you know extremely well, especially if you're telling something about your own past. This, unfortunately, has a couple of pitfalls, too. The first and most dangerous of the pitfalls is that it's a story that only interests you. I know I'm saying something that might be heartbreaking, but as much as I hate to say this, and as much as we're living in the world of video diaries and vlogs and all of that, from the average person to hear someone else go on and on and on about their lives isn't necessarily the most interesting thing. The second challenge that sometimes comes up when you do something that's too personal is that you don't have perspective on it, and especially if you're a younger writer. And often when you don't have perspective, you're going to make your characters passive. And when you have a passive character, you run the risk of losing an audience. Very recently, I was involved in the production of a pilot of a TV series, and while it came out much better than any of us expected it to, it did have a slight challenge in that the lead character in it was basing perhaps a little too much of it on his own experience. So he wasn't able to invest in that main character the type of insight that might have made something that I feel is very good reach to the stars for its highest and best. Now, you might have guessed by the fact that I started with the negatives of the personal story first that I'm indicating my bias. Well, you're absolutely right. I'd much prefer you waited to write your personal story until you were really ready to give it that attention. You really were familiar with the screenwriting format. However, let's now talk about the benefits of writing a personal story. Not only do you know the nuance and the details, because what separates a good story from a bad story is an accumulation of plot details, character details, setting details, location details, all of which you would know very, very well. But you can invest it with a sense of heart that is often lacking in genre pieces. Genre pieces, by and large, are really good if you're a story writer or a scene writer. If you're a character writer, they tend to be a little bit more difficult. When you're writing a personal story, if you're a character writer, this is probably going to be your catnip. Think of a lot of the great plays. Think of a lot of the great character-driven films. When I'm saying great plays, look at your Eugene O'Neills or your Tennessee Williams or your Edward Albees. These are people who wrote very much from their own experience and their own insights. And they were able to deliver characters that were unbelievable. Think about J. Patrick Shanley when he was writing Moonstruck. Here you have a very simple romance that's just tricked out with every single character detail you could possibly want in a movie that even 30 years after it was made holds up beautifully. Okay, there's a couple of moments, and yeah, Cher sometimes is annoying because she's the only character who's not really Italian, and it kind of shows. But the level of intimate detail in there is superb. When Steve Soderbergh was writing Sex, Lies, and Videotape, a lot of it was based on his own insight into the world. And that was his first film. I had the pleasure of working with him at the first company I worked at, and watching his process take that story and bring it to fruition was fascinating, because here was someone who was not that much older than me and was being given the chance of a lifetime. And not only did he succeed, I think Steve Soderbergh succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. So there's nothing wrong with writing your own story, but please think about it. And if you are going to write your own story, there is another danger I would like for you to try to avoid, and that is to impose an ending that's not real. All too often when people are writing about their own lives, especially if there's something that was not so happy, they will tend to try to fix that unhappiness, and in the process come up with something that is as phony as a glass eye, to quote Nothing Sacred. So be careful with that. Once again, there's nothing wrong with either writing a genre piece or a personal story. My bias is towards writing a genre piece simply because it's easier and it has a format in place and already has things that you can kind of plug in. If you're writing for a class, this is especially important because you're going to be writing most of your script the night before it's due. So you want to make sure that you can do something that is at least remotely passable. Thank you very much, and look forward to continuing our discussion on backward engineering your script.